everybody. Welcome to Broken Rules. I am John Lanier. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have an excellent guest, guitar player from here in Nashville, Patrick Stevens. We're going to talk about his career and some of the people he's played with and some of the things that he's got going on. But I first wanted to bring up some sad news that happened this week, and that is that we lost Dickie Betts, the legendary Dickie Betts from the legendary Allman Brothers Band. And there's been lots of tributes on social media that have been really sad, but really good to read and to hear some people's stories of people that knew him, people that worked with him. Warren Haynes' tribute was very good and very interesting. Several others, I can't even remember all of them. But he was one of my favorite, probably my absolute favorite guitar players. Love the Allman Brothers Band. I loved what he did particularly. And just another indication how some of these legends from that era are leaving this earth. He was 80 years old. But what an impression he made on music, and certainly on me, and there's millions of other people like me. So if you love Dickie Betts too, I feel you. And if you don't know who Dickie Betts is, you must be from another planet, and what are you doing here? But if you're not really familiar with him and never really dug into that stuff, you really should do it. The Allman Brothers were fantastic. I think I came to them in the 80s in sort of the heavy metal era. That's what I was listening to. That's what I was playing at the time. I was a teenager, and that was kind of my musical world at the time. And for some reason, and of course I knew who the Allman Brothers were, and I knew, some of their bigger songs from the radio and everything. But for some reason I ended up with a VHS copy of their Live at Great Woods, which was a concert film. And gosh, that just killed me. I wore that thing out, and I remember thinking, not taking anything away from that metal stuff, but I'm like, here's some grown people right here doing some stuff. It just felt to me like, of course they were older, and they were, but it wasn't like they were old. I didn't think they were. I just like, this is some grown up stuff right here. These dudes are not messing around. And it made a huge impression on me. And, man, I've been a huge fan ever since then. So rest in peace, Dickie Betts. I'm going to be listening to lots of Allman Brothers. I always do, but even more so for the next month or so, I'm sure. Live at Fillmore East, I've already listened to it a couple of times since Thursday, and I will be listening to it and many other things again. But anyway, thank you again for joining us. Patrick Stevens, a great guy, great guitar player, going to have some really good insight about what it's like to work as a live touring and recording guitar player here in Nashville, and just how much that takes, and, really exciting stuff. So join us for Patrick Stevens. All right, Patrick, thank you for doing this, man.
Thanks for having me, John.
How was the commute?
It was brutal. I'll tell you that much. Traffic was really rough for the whole, I have about 30 steps, I think, from the house.
Yeah. Well, hey, I really appreciate you doing this. This is a new venture for me and my buddy Chris, and basically we want to have a wide variety of musicians on here, and you're certainly one of my favorite guitar players in town, which is saying a lot, especially since we're in Nashville. But really want to talk about your life in that, and how you got into that, and what it's like to be a working guitar player and a touring guitar player, and working with a lot of different artists, and just kind of dig into that.
Sure, man.
So tell me a little bit about who you have played with, some of the artists that you've worked with.
Man, played with Brantley Gilbert for a little while back in the day. Played with Rodney Atkins for a couple of years. Played with an artist named Will Hogue for a couple of years.
He's great, yeah.
He's phenomenal. That was like grad school for rock and roll, playing with Will. these days I'm doing a lot of bouncing around to play some with Jesse James Decker. When she needs someone, I'm available. I'm actually flying out to Kansas tomorrow to do some stuff with Logan Mize. He's a really cool artist. Very, I don't know, kind of like Mellencamp meets Springsteen meets a few other things with his own kind of modern twist. Man, Eric Pasley, trying to think of a few others. Ashley Monroe, did some studio work for T-Pain back in the day when I lived in Atlanta.
Really?
Yeah, that was fun.
Okay, I had no idea about that.
Yeah. So yeah, I've just kind of bounced around with a lot of different people.
Yeah, T-Pain.
Yeah.
What about how did that work?
It was a blast. So there's a great drummer in Atlanta and producer named Terrell Sass, who is we met when I was at Atlanta Student Music. He had already graduated and had been doing pretty big things. He's been a part of, he was all over T.I.'s Paper Trail record, a lot of Rick Ross stuff, just a lot of big things. Produces Jennifer Holliday from Dreamgirls and all that. And he was playing drums on a session for T-Pain and called me up, and I wound up going over there and laying some guitar on that. It was a lot of fun. That guy is a lot of fun to work with in the studio because he knows what he wants.
Yeah.
He has a great work ethic, and he just creates a good environment. It's a good.
That's a once in a lifetime kind of thing for a guitar player, though, to work with somebody like that. I mean, that's not your average gig, I imagine.
Yeah, it was pretty cool,
Yeah. So you're from Atlanta originally, and I know you've been in Nashville a few years, but you didn't move here as a kid. You kind of had your career going before you even left Atlanta, right?
Yes. Yeah. I had already been coming up here for a couple of years. Actually, as a matter of fact, the whole time I played with Will, the whole time I played with Brantley, those guys, I was still living in Atlanta.
So you had to drive 4 hours before you even got to the bus.
Oh, uphill both ways, the whole thing.
That is rough.
But yeah, it was, that's one of those things that lets you know how bad you really want it. Are you willing to make those kind of sacrifices? Because that's kind of rough. But yeah, I was a working musician in Atlanta before coming up here. Hindsight being 2020, I wish that I'd come up here way earlier than I did.
Really?
But yeah. But honestly, I was a little scared to make the move, and I was already married at the time. And by the time that I knew that I would have wanted to do it, I already had a wife.
Right.
So,
commitments.
Exactly. So, it's kind of tough to just be like, hey, let's pack up and get you away from all of your friends and your family.
Right.
And everything happens as it's supposed to. In its own time. That we moved up, and it was actually my wife who decided she was really ready for it and brought that up to me.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then it was time.
It absolutely was.
You grew up in Atlanta, and what age did you start playing?
Started playing guitar when I was, I was either in 6th or 7th grade, so I think I was 12. That would have been probably the age. My uncle Jim, who still lives out that way, he's married to my Aunt Bonnie. He has a really cool old Martin D35.
Okay.
I didn't know what it was back then, but I remember we were just visiting at their house, and I was just kind of plunking on a little bit. Thought it was just really cool. Had no idea what I was doing.
Yeah.
And my dad was just saying, well, I've got a great old acoustic at home. And
did you even know that your dad played, or did your dad play?
Remembered seeing the guitar, and I'd heard him strum a few chords. He would strum, Twist and Shout, or play, let's say, something like Twist and Shout, or like Walk Don't Run by the Ventures.
Okay.
Something along those lines. Yeah. But yeah, he brought it down and put some strings on it, and then I started playing. I still use that guitar all the time to this day. So
did your dad teach you some stuff, or your uncle?
He bought me my uncle kind of showed me a couple little basic things, and my dad got me a Mel Bay chord book. Yeah. So I started with that, and then just kind of, I went through a little love-hate relationship with the guitar, because when you're a kid and you're trying to play an acoustic guitar, it hurts.
It does.
It's hard. But I finally when I got over that initial hurdle, I was hooked. And
was there a point during all that when you realized that, like, holy cow, this is what I want to do with my life? Or was that later?
That was probably later. I really enjoyed it, but I just didn't know I didn't know there was any way to have a career doing it. It was a
Right.
thing that I knew that I wanted. I knew I always wanted to play
Hmm.
and I always wanted to get better, but I didn't know anyone who was a musician. My family didn't know anyone who was a musician. There was no I really had zero guidance
Hmm.
in that whole department. So I had no idea how you would go about actually having a life doing that.
Hmm.
I thought you had to just somehow have a band and become a rock star. I thought that was the only thing you could. I didn't know anything about session musicians, sidemen,
Yeah.
nothing like that.
What were you listening to during that time?
During that time, I was a rockhead, I mean, so I was more into, when I say rock, I mean, like, it was the grunge thing was big at that time,
Yeah.
so, I mean, I loved Soundgarden, STP,
Okay.
bands like that, Pearl Jam. My I got into Black Sabbath, Guns N' Roses, loved Ozzy Osbourne's solo stuff, got into Stevie Ray Vaughan,
Yeah.
so and then just got into, like, real guitar heavy kinda music.
Yeah.
So, like what we were saying before we put it in the red, listening to Zeppelin,
Yeah.
listening to that kind of stuff.
So was it pretty soon after that you graduated to an electric guitar after the Mel Bay
Yes.
chord book and all that stuff?
Yep.
What was your first guitar?
First electric guitar I had for a very little bit of time. It was an Epiphone. Like looking back, it was like a Super Strat, like with Floyd Rose and
Yeah,
all
yeah,
that
yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
Cool guitar, banana headstock and
Yeah.
everything. But not too long after having it, the same music store where I got it from actually had a black Les Paul studio. Gibson Les
Okay.
Paul studio
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
Wound up trading it and gave a little bit of money for that.
Yeah.
Got that guitar and then been playing a lot of Les Pauls ever since, as a matter of fact.
When was the first time you started working with other musicians or started in a band and that kind of thing? Were you in a
That would have
garage
been
band as a teenager?
seventh or eighth grade. No, maybe seventh grade. I think it was seventh grade. Had some friends, guy named Nick Rabiolo
Uh-huh.
and guy named who was the drummer? Andy. Man, I feel bad. I can't remember his last name. But anyway, we had a band that we would go to Andy's house and just kind of bash it out in the basement and play. It was a lot of fun. And then eighth grade would have been my first gig, I guess you'd say. That
Uh-huh.
was twice in eighth grade. It was for my school. Muhammad Ali came to my school for some kind of event.
Really?
I can't remember what
That's
the
pretty cool.
event was. It was someone who worked at the school or a parent was, I guess she worked in some way with a foundation that worked with Muhammad Ali.
Yeah.
So anyway, he came to my middle school, Richards Middle School in Lawrenceville, Georgia, and I played the Star Spangled Banner for it
Oh,
on the electric,
Yeah.
trying to channel Hendrix.
Yeah. Did you meet Muhammad Ali?
I mean, shook his hand.
Yeah.
That was about it. And,
Okay.
And what's funny is then I got older and became a boxing fan too. So, but anyway, yeah. So then also later that year for like the eighth grade social beforehand, I had a band put together and we
Yeah.
played before instrumental versions of everything because in eighth grade no one was singing.
Yeah. That
So-
was, yeah.
We did instrumental versions of Iron Man, Paranoid, Sweet Child of Mine, For Whom the Bell Tolled. Yeah, I'm sure everyone was really enjoying listening to us play and no one singing.
That's how I started singing. That's how a lot
Yeah.
of people started singing, I think, because there are no singers and it's like,
Yeah.
somebody's got to go ahead and do this.
Somebody's got to be the front man
Yeah.
or woman.
Yeah. And I wasn't very good at it, but somebody's got to do it.
Right.
Necessity
Exactly.
is the mother of invention. So at what point, I assume later in high school, it was more of that and more of like more serious gigs, or were you still just playing in bands, or when did you move from, or were you in bands for a while? I guess is a question.
It's really funny. There weren't really bands to be in where I'm from. It was kind of a weird anomaly. There were several guitar players in the school and we would get together and just
Yeah.
basically wheedly wee and
Yeah.
just enjoyed kind of jamming with each other. There was like one drummer and one bass player in the whole school. And I didn't live in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
It just wasn't really a thing that much of anyone was pursuing. So it was
Yeah.
something that I wanted,
Right.
but I didn't know anyone.
Yeah.
So I just kind of jammed with some friends a little bit. It was when I was in college, I kind of messed around with some bands, didn't really gig a whole lot or anything. It was more after that when I really found a footing. in the
Right.
whole thing. Yeah, because to kind of frame it, I'm 41 now, and so at my point growing up was before the internet became what it is nowadays.
Mhm.
So you didn't have the social networking. You didn't
Right.
have
There was email, and you could go on a
I mean,
search engine or something, maybe.
exactly, and there wasn't all
Yeah.
that stuff. You didn't have YouTube like you do now. You also it also wasn't the information superhighway. They call it the information
Yeah.
superhighway, but you couldn't look up album credits on it back then,
Mhm.
or at least that I knew of. You weren't gonna, and even if you were, dial-up was going to take
Yeah.
30 minutes to
Yeah.
upload the site. So kind of going back to when I said that I had no idea that it could be a career path, I just didn't know these things. So I have to plead pure ignorance on a lot of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, did you go to college for music, or you?
Later on.
Okay.
So I went to University of Georgia first and got a business degree.
Okay.
And then a couple of years later, I went back to music school.
And you were still playing during this time when you were in college?
I was playing the whole time. Yeah. And I was playing. I was a karate instructor, actually, was my job. So I was working most nights during the week, as a matter of fact. And then just had some downtime playing guitar. I didn't get to play as much guitar during that time.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I was playing and had some, I can't even remember the name of the band, but had a band I was in for a minute, and then we just kind of jammed with some people. But it was really after college when I got a chance to meet some musicians.
Right. In Atlanta.
In Atlanta.
Started playing.
Oh, in Atlanta.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, and I guess, unless I'm missing something, your career has mostly been kind of as a side guy, right?
Absolutely.
You were never in a band for any long period of time.
I was, and that's kind of where it really started for me. So I was in a band. The band was named after the front man, but it was the Daniel Lee Band.
Okay.
Some guys in Winder, Georgia, and me, and we wound up getting a record deal with Average Joe's here in town, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
We were playing mainly like country rock covers, and then had plenty of originals.
Yeah.
Doing that stuff. And that's how I met Brantley Gilbert and all those guys involved in that camp, and a lot of other people, because we did a lot of opening for national acts.
Yeah.
And we traveled regionally and played a lot. And this was while I was in music school.
Okay.
And before, as a matter of fact, and afterwards. And then eventually I kind of made the step to get out and be a sideman playing for other people.
Yeah. So you went to school at, what was it, the Atlanta Music Institute?
Atlanta Institute of Music, yes.
And you studied guitar there?
I did. Yeah.
Okay.
They at least at that time, it was guitar, bass, and drums. And then they had just started a recording program.
Mm-hmm.
It's become a 4-year school since then. It's basically getting like a technical certificate for music is what it would be. So not quite the same. It's not quite the same depth and time. Like if you went to Belmont or Berkeley or MI, or, if you went to like a university like in North Texas or something along those lines, it was more an overview.
But you already had an undergraduate degree in business.
I had an undergraduate degree in business.
Yeah.
Yes. And the cool thing that I will say about music school for me was, number one, there was the networking. Like I mentioned, the T-Pain session, that would have never happened had I not gone to AIM and met Terrell. But there were multiple things like that. But also it exposed me to some things that I could learn, and it taught me how to practice. And it taught me, basically, you were given the skills to then learn whatever you would like to learn on your own, if that makes any sense. You were taught how to teach yourself.
Yeah. Well, that's a good segue, because I wanted to talk with you about this, because this is one of the things that, just knowing you and being friends with you and talking to you and listening to you talk about how you prepare for gigs and stuff like that. And this is, not necessarily the case in this town, because, as you know, there are a lot of guitar players in Nashville. Newsflash, in case anybody didn't know that. As
a matter of fact, like if you want to find a better guitar player than you, probably just go to Publix.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I've put an entire band together at Publix before.
Exactly. I mean, that's really all it takes.
But there are obviously some fantastic guitar players, and you're one of them, but you're humble enough that you put a lot of time in to it, where what I've seen firsthand is a lot of times people don't.
Mhm.
You know, somebody gets hired, they go out and they're like, "Oh, I got it." But that seems to be real important to you if you get hired for a gig to know it inside and out, and you actually tell me about that. How does that work? How much prep time goes into something like if you're getting ready to go out on a run with somebody new or
Man,
something like that?
every situation stands on its own. I've had things where it's been 2 days of notice. You
Mhm.
know,
Yeah,
I've had things where I have a lot of notice.
yeah,
I've had things where I'm still getting the set list when I'm en route
yeah,
to
yeah,
the bus or something, which it's wild how often that kind of thing
yeah, yeah.
happens. But at first, let me talk about what my mentality is on
Okay,
that.
sure.
You know, if if an artist or a producer or a manager, if someone calls me and they want me to come in and play for their artist, whether it's a one-off or it's a string of dates, or if it's, hey, this is going to be a job for a
Mhm.
while, man, as a side man, one of the things that you have to remember is that you are in a service industry. So it's not, even though you want, when you're up there performing live, you do want to put on a compelling performance, and there are times where the spotlight is going to be on you. But the thing
Yeah,
you need to remember is that it's not your name on the marquee;
right.
it's the artist. So, example, like I'm getting out to play with this guy Logan Mize
Mhm.
comes in, who's freaking great, and when when an artist has made records, they have made decisions. They've made critical decisions about what they want to be on that record. They've made
Mhm.
the decisions about, just from my perspective as a guitar player, or if I'm in a multi instrumentalist role, because sometimes I'll be
Yeah,
playing banjo, mandolin, whatever else.
yeah.
Very rarely pedal steel, but sometimes things like that.
Mhm.
But they made a commitment that that is what they wanted on
Yeah.
that record. They put in the effort, they made the decisions, they spent the money,
Mhm.
and a lot of it, a lot of times, to make these
Yep.
records. And they're also very attached to that.
Yeah, and
You
those are the
know,
parts.
those are the parts,
Yeah,
and they'll let you know if it's okay to deviate from that. But
right.
I would rather know what I'm starting with, and then when I'm comfortable with that, then you can feel out like, well, this is where I can stretch out a little bit. And when you've been doing it for a little while, you can realize the parts that you can put your fingerprints on,
Mhm.
and the parts that, like, nah, I need to kind of nail
Or they'll let
this
you
as is.
know. Say,
Or
"Hey, can you stretch this out a little bit? I love what you're doing there. Don't stop. Go with that." Yeah.
exactly. And there are also plenty of artists who they do want to do something different live than what the record is.
Right.
And that's great. I love when I get that chance.
Right.
That a lot of times was the case playing with Will Hogue, for example.
Right.
Will doesn't want every night to be the same.
Right.
He wants, he wanted it to be a special experience each time that you play that song. Like, that song's not going to get played exactly the same every time.
Right.
Um, hold on to your hat and
Yeah.
and get after it. But so that's kind of my idea when it comes down to preparation. I want to be prepared enough that the artist is comfortable. Um, and again, an example in this, I'm filling in for a buddy of mine who this is his typical gig.
Mhm.
It's a guy named Tyler Shirelli, he was Florida Georgia Lions band leader for years,
Mhm.
and he has his fingers in a lot of pies. Fantastic player, but man, that I'm representing the person who I'm subbing for when I'm going to play.
Right.
If I don't show up
He's
prepared,
stuck his he's saying, "Hey, this guy's got it. Don't worry about it."
right, exactly, I'm gonna leave him with a bad look if I don't
Yeah.
show up prepared
Right.
and know what I'm doing. So it's very important to me to do that, because I want to get called back.
Yep.
And it's just it's a respectful thing to do. Again, the artist has decided this is what they want things to sound like.
Yeah.
You know, and they're the one writing the check
Right.
too. You kind of need
And
to
there's
do it
probably
their
a lot
way.
of times cues in there that, if you don't hit it, it might throw them off and they're
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, and then there's just a comfort level there too. Like, a lot of times what I'll do too, if I can get a board tape of what someone's done live, you can hear when you've got experience what is something that, like, okay, this was in the moment, and what is something like, oh, that's committed. Like, this is
Mhm.
what they do. Especially on intros, second verses, bridges, things like
Mhm.
that. Um, I'm listening to that because I want the artist to be totally comfortable when I'm up there.
Right.
Yeah, so that's what that's all about. So the biggest part of preparation for me is definitely number one, listening. I'll spend as much time with headphones in or AirPods in, whatever, just listening to the material. I spend more time listening than I do actually playing.
Right.
Because if I can sing the part in my head, I can put my fingers on it.
Right.
And I can do it. And you want to get past thinking of shapes and things like that. You want to be making music.
Right. But then you'd have other times where you're like, it's last minute and you're listening through your headphones on the way to the show.
Yes.
Making notes in your mind and being like, hey, it's an emergency situation. I got to come in here. And
I can't tell you how many times I've been charting tunes for a gig on an airplane.
Right.
So like you hope that you know the key. You know, or I mean, you'll find out even if I don't know the key beforehand, I can hear where where one is.
Yeah,
that's always really. Thank God for noise canceling headphones nowadays. Yeah. God, it makes things a lot easier.
Yeah,
because like when you got the jet engine going, in addition to trying to pick out chord changes, that's fun.
So, are you also listening when you're prepping for those gigs, especially newer ones, with somebody new, to the sound and thinking, okay, what guitar do I want to bring with me on this run, and what pedals do I need? What's your thought process on trying to figure out what gear you're going to use and how much gear you can use? Because I'm sure sometimes you can only bring so much.
Right. It all depends on the situation. They all stand on their own. I want to try to get close to. I'm going to try to get as close as I can to what's going on the record, without making my life miserable. Because you know, sometimes if you have to have too many things you're tap dancing on and everything like that's
right,
you're really setting yourself up for some error.
Yeah,
but because that's also it depends on how much preparation time you have for that too. Because that is part of the performance is stepping on these things and timing things the right way and knowing when you're going to have a chance to tune and things along those lines. So you know, for me again, like with that, what I do is I'll try to figure out what are the effects that are mainly being used, and also listen, and also thinking a lot of times about the what is the band set up and what is going to be my role. Is my role going to be to take up space? Like if it's something where the record sounds real big and the keys and all that kind of stuff on it, but when you're playing live, there's not going to be a keyboard player, right? And things like that. I'm probably going to be a little wetter in my sound with more reverb and delay, and things like that to try to fill that space. If it's a bigger band, I'm going to be a little slimmer kind of sound where I'm trying to be square peg, square hole, right? You know, trying to fit exactly where I need to be. Now, if it is when I'm putting a rig together, my number one thing that I'm trying to do is remember, like, try to have everything I need and nothing that I don't. Right. I don't necessarily need a bunch of options. I need things that I know are going to work and that I don't have less things to break. Yeah. Less things to go down, less things to have to carry.
And you obviously a lot of times don't have the opportunity to switch guitars 3 times to, you know, do you try to bring as few as possible to try to get what needs to happen, or does that just depend on the situation?
It all depends. You know, a lot of times you run into tuning things where you have songs that you really need to be tuned down a half step or maybe a whole step for. Right. Sometimes an open tuning. Right. Which I've got a whole thing about that as far as the way that I approach those things live too.
But sometimes you're switching out, playing acoustic or an electric, depending on what the show is.
Exactly. And there's some that I just want I want a certain sound. Example, there's a Christian artist named Brinley Brown who I play with a good bit. She was a voice finalist. She was on Team Blake and then I think got stolen by Gwen or something. But we played together at a thing at Austin City Limits Festival. Like, what is it? Like I said, it would have been a month ago. Time's been a blur as of late. It was right before spring break.
South by Southwest?
Did I say Austin? Yeah, South by Southwest.
Same town.
Yep, exactly. It was Austin.
Different time of year.
But, you know, there were 2 songs that on the recording, on the part, they're using a whammy bar. Like I can tell, it's using a Strat tremolo. And I was like, man, well, I got to have that. And also, when it comes down to a tremolo bar, I'm kind of like a drummer with a double kick where, like, if it's there, I'm going to friggin' use it. Yeah. You know? Yeah. So I'm such a big Jeff Beck fan and stuff like that. Like, so I'm going to use that thing. But there were some other things where I was copping pedal steel lines, and I have this really cool Duesenberg double cat with multi benders. Yeah. I can bend the G and B strings.
I've seen that. I love that.
It's a great guitar. And it's just a fun guitar to play anyway.
Yeah.
And I brought both guitars so that number one, I would have a backup if I broke
Yeah.
a string or something, but I wanted the bar and I
Yeah.
wanted the benders, and I was committing to really using the benders for something live.
Yeah.
So I brought that out. I've tried to be the guy who can bring one guitar
Yeah.
to a gig, and if it's a short enough gig, I can do that. But I'm always so scared to death. Like, this will be the one day in the last 5 years that I break a string. I
Yeah.
can't remember the last time I broke a string live or at all, but I
Yeah.
just know it's the one day that I bring one guitar is
Yeah.
when I will break a string.
Yeah. Yeah. And that happens, and
Yeah.
probably, I mean, there's, yeah. And usually those things, most people are able to play it off or whatever, but then there's things about what about amps going down and all of that stuff. I mean,
And at a certain point, you just got to realize, like, you know what, we're just surviving today.
Yeah.
You know what, we're going to have those. I mean, you want to have a backup
yeah.
situation if at all possible.
Yeah.
But man, at a certain point when it's like you're using backline gear and the backline amp goes down on you, which I've had that happen before. When you have things like that, it's like, what do you
do?
What do you want? I mean, normally a backline company is going to have a second amp,
Yeah.
so you'll do that, but you just
Figure
wing
it out.
it. You just figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah. That's kind of part of the adrenaline of the whole thing. Is just like, something could go wrong.
Absolutely. I mean, that's really the working man aspect of it to me is, in most cases, you're not going to have a guitar tech who's right behind you to take care of every issue you have. You have to be able to handle those things on your own. Hence, like when I'm talking about gear, everything I need, nothing I don't.
Yeah.
I want the options for the studio.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I'm recording, I want all my options. But when I'm playing live, just let's have as little to think about as possible so that what we can think about is performing.
Right.
Putting on a compelling performance for the people who are in front of you.
Right.
Also other little things to remember. Like when I'm playing live, like with a pedal board, for example, I want space between things. Because if something goes down, I need to be able to get to those cables.
Right.
Like I see a lot of guys now, it's such a trend to have everything so neatly, like.
And you got to take everything off to get something.
Yeah. And one thing you'll notice is that you don't have a whole lot of guys who are over 30 who have been doing this for a long time who shove everything together like that because they've had something go wrong.
Yeah. Well, and it's different too, because sometimes you're on a bus and you got a little bit more flexibility there with what you can bring, but a lot of times you're doing fly dates and you really just got whatever you can carry with you, right? And then you trust that they're going to have whatever backline you requested or that they've put into their contract or whatever.
Absolutely. And nowadays we're in an age where people want amps are starting to I don't want to say they're getting phased out, but there's
people are using other options,
a lot more simulators. It's not my preference. I would much rather have a little bit of stage volume.
Yeah.
But I mean, if it cleans things up in front of house or so the singer can hear themselves better.
Yeah.
I mean, we do whatever needs to happen there.
Yeah.
Like, as a matter of fact, that's part of what I was doing today, preparing for this gig. We're going direct. So I have some modelers that I'm able to use on a Line 6 box that I have.
Mm-hmm.
And just kind of dialing that in as best I can.
Yeah. So the live thing, I imagine, is especially, any of it. Traveling is rough, whether you're doing it in a bus or a plane or a car or whatever. And you're spending most of your time getting to where you need to be or waiting for the show to happen and that kind of stuff. So what do you spend your time on when all of that downtime?
Man, trying to have some sort of a normal routine is the best thing that you can do. I learned that I was listening to an interview with, I think it was Adam Levy, if I'm not mistaken, great guitar player. Who I almost said Eugene Levy.
He's great too.
He's great too. I don't know if he plays guitar or not. I mean, you know what? He killed it in the Mighty Wind.
Yeah.
But Yeah, Adam Levy was talking about how when he was on the road with Nora Jones, that was a thing for him, was having some sort of normal routine. I try to, if at all possible, try to get some kind of exercise in that day, whether it's if I have access to a shower, so like trying to, whether it's hit a gym and lift a little bit. Like when I've been on bus tours, I'll throw some kettlebells and yoga mat, a few things in the bay. But for fly dates, we've got a hotel. I try my best if there's time to at least get down to the gym for a little bit. Try to find something to get out and do and be social with the guys in the band too, do that kind of stuff. Like try to have as much of a normal day as possible, and also some practice time. If at all possible, I like to be able to spend a little time with my instrument during the day. If I need to refresh tunes for the gig, I can do that. But sometimes even just working on your own personal practice, things you want to do to stay inspired.
And you may have more time to do that than you would if you were at home during the day.
Sometimes, yes, that is true.
Especially when you got kids running around.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's the thing that I've found, like whenever I have to do stretches of time in Vegas, that tends to be like some of my best practicing time that I can have.
And you're not spending it gambling, which would probably not be a good idea.
Yeah, exactly. I've just never been a big gambler.
Me either.
That's funny how that is. Like I think once I lose $5, I'm losing interest.
Yeah. 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 That's one thing I got going for me. I never was a big gambler.
Well, I chose enough of a gamble when I decided I was going to try to play guitar for a living.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a pretty huge ask of the universe.
Well, yeah. Tell me about that. Cause, and I know, and we'll talk a little bit in a second too. I know it's not just live stuff. I know you're doing some recording and other things like that, but that pressure of trying to make sure your calendar's full and trying to make sure that stuff is lined up and balancing short-term stuff and long-term stuff. And, I got to, can you come do this tonight kind of thing.
Right.
How do you stay sane trying to manage your calendar?
I don't. I'm not a sane person. Just ask my wife that question. You can ask her tonight if you'd like to. But for me personally, it's everything is in seasons. There's seasons of abundance. There are seasons of not abundance.
Yeah.
That's how that is. I mean, I've gone through times where for months I'm just, feels like I'm slammed, but it's manageable. Everything's great. Like, and I'm like, man, this is awesome. Then I'll have times where there's a couple of weeks where I'm pulling my phone out and I'm like, I know I paid the bill. Like, why is is anyone going to call me or what I feel like has been the case for me. And I'm sure other people have had the same experience, but I know for me, it amplifies it more in times where let's just say, wouldn't necessarily say times of famine, but times of not feast.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you get a call about something that seems like it would be fantastic. And then it just goes radio silent.
Yeah.
And disappears. And it had nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
But in my case, it's impossible for me to not look at myself and be like, what about
what happened there?
What happened there? What did I do? Did I somehow was my tone of voice on the phone wrong to where they changed their mind? Or I will say that's been, and this is just getting off of even it being about music, but that's kind of been personally a journey I'm trying to go through, is understanding the things that you can actually have control over and that you can change and that you can affect, and the things that you can't. I know that's that's a very stoic philosophy kind of thing.
Well, and trusting the things you can do and say, and don't start second guessing that. You know what I mean? Just because something beyond that happens or whatever.
Well, and I'm the king of second guessing. That's
yeah,
what I do.
Too.
I mean, and I think that's a musician or an artistic mindset, because we are always detail oriented. We are always thinking. And one thing I've noticed about people who are artists, to some extent, they tend to be pretty empathic people. So, you're feeling things a little bit more than I guess the average person is who doesn't do that. Because I mean, the one thing about doing something, I don't love the term referring to people as creatives. I feel like that's very trendy right now.
It's very trendy right now.
And I personally, I don't really like it because it just sounds wimpy in a way because no one ever says it in a way. The way they always do it is almost like, oh, use velvet gloves when you're handling a creative.
Yeah.
Like that. Well, at the same time, man, like this is real life. Like strap on a helmet. Like
Yeah.
we gotta get through life here. But people who are very creative people tend to they feel a little bit more.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm somewhere in that middle ground. Like
Yeah.
I'm a pretty analytical person. I've gotten that way more so as I've gotten older.
Mhm.
But I feel like I'm a pretty creative person, pretty artistic person. And I mean, so I can, in an interaction with a person, when I walk away, I can very easily walk away just thinking like, oh man, what did I say
Mhm.
during that whole thing? Did I put my foot in my mouth?
Or should have said this, or
or I should not have said
Yeah,
this,
yeah.
whatever. And then musically walking away from a situation, and like, if you're not getting a call very soon after that,
yeah.
of someone even just saying like, "Hey man, great job," you're
Yeah.
thinking, "I blew it.
Yeah.
I ruined everything." And then just getting to that point where you can say like, or you can understand that, like, "Hey, I came in and I did my thing,
Mhm.
and we'll just see what comes of it." It's a lot easier said than done to do that, but I know that's the healthiest way to approach things.
Yeah.
But when you go through stretches of your life, where you're like, well, is anything under my control? Can I have some control over
Yeah.
over some of the things that are going on?
Yeah.
That's when it gets tough. But the more people that I know and over time and that have been doing this a lot longer than I have, the more I come to realize that that's apparently a normal thing.
Yeah.
Apparently it's part of the journey.
Yeah. Yep. Well, one thing you mentioned before, and you and I have talked about this a little bit before, is doing that sort of utility thing. And I know you branch out and learn other things because it's going to make you more marketable. It's
Mhm.
going to do, I know you probably sing harmony in most of the gigs that you do, or
I do
how's
sing
that?
harmony a good bit. Not always. It depends on the range.
Yeah.
I've found that it's a lot easier for me to sing with females,
Uh-huh.
like to sing with women than
Uh-huh.
it is with men, because I don't have to worry. With men, a lot of times they want you to have the higher harmony
Right.
going over their voice.
Right.
And man, I just have a place like where my voice switches from chest voice into head voice.
Uh-huh.
Oh, it's just not. It's not fun to try to sing with a lot of guys, but yes, I do sing. I do sing a good bit of harmony.
Yeah. Yeah. And it depends on what they need and what part or whatever.
It depends on what they need. Also, what I'm trying to play at the same time.
Right.
And I'll be really honest with someone when it comes down to that. Like, hey, can you sing backgrounds on that? If I'm playing something that's really, really involved,
Yeah.
I may just tell them, like, man, I can get I can get this word, I can get this word, I can get this phrase, but like when you start doing things where you're like trying to play slide and fret behind the slide and manage a volume pedal and tap onto this thing and you're trying to sing into the mic at the same time, that's a whole lot of this.
Yeah.
I'm getting it wrong there. It's this.
When did you start singing? Did you start singing out of necessity just for gigs like that, or did you?
Well, I sang in chorus growing up.
Okay.
And I had sang backgrounds in a little bit in bands that I had been in.
Okay.
Then it was more out of necessity. When I really started singing a lot more was definitely when I was in the bluegrass band at Jane's Hideaway in town.
Mm-hmm.
So in just a little background here for the podcast, in 2020, I mean, we all know everything shut down for musicians, basically.
Yep.
Studio guys were still working a good bit. And actually I was doing a good bit of tracking at that time. But a friend of mine got called to put together the music for a new restaurant bar in town that was called Jane's Hideaway. Now it's on the east side, but at that time it was in Printer's Alley.
Yeah.
And I was literally the only guy that he knew in town.
Yeah.
And he knew I played some mandolin.
Yeah.
And at that time I was really trying to focus on pedal steel that year.
Right.
Yeah. And that's one thing I've had this conversation with several people. I feel like a lot of people picked up new instruments during that time.
Yeah.
But I was working on my pedal steel playing, and then he called me about this thing. I was playing mandolin 3-4 nights a week.
Oh yeah.
For 3-4 hours a night. And so I was like, all right, well, it looks like 2020 is going to be the year of the mandolin.
Yeah.
And like I played more mandolin than guitar that year.
Yeah.
And so but I wound up singing a lot more because we wanted a lot of 3-part harmony in that band. So I started having to really work on head voice and everything. And so my voice improved a lot, and my ability to play and sing at the same
You
time.
singing tenor parts mostly.
I
higher
was singing a lot of
Yeah.
tenor parts at that point. I was actually surprised myself with being able to do some of the high lonesome stuff.
Yeah.
You know, let's not kid ourselves. It didn't sound like Ricky Skaggs or
Yeah.
Vince Gill or anyone doing it.
Yeah.
But I was doing a lot more. I was doing a lot more singing at that time, and a lot of that stuck. That's been helpful.
Yeah. And you've got some other weird things. What did you get, a bouzouki or something?
I play bouzouki. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I play bouzouki. Like I said, you know, banjo, which I mean, it's just basically guitar, but I use finger picks and different tunings to try to make it sound more like a banjo.
And have you done any road gigs with the steel?
I've not done road gigs with the steel. I've done a couple little like 2 and 3 song live things.
Yeah.
And more recording with the steel.
You're going to do something with me, hopefully. And
Yes.
We talked about that. Yeah. Pedal steel is, man, that's a whole other universe.
Yeah. Steel players are not normal people.
Yeah.
Not good ones.
Yeah.
You know, because it's like flying a helicopter.
Yeah.
You know, and you're having to, I can't think of another instrument that tests your ear
Mm-hmm.
and your sense and all your musical sensibilities at one time, like pedal steel does.
Yeah.
Because physically you're using all 4 limbs, you know, and in different aspects. I'm like, you're using your hands. Your left hand is keeping you in tune and handling a lot of the tone. Right hand is got your grips and everything right there. And you have to use, most people, I like using finger picks. You don't have to use finger picks, but you're doing that. So you're staying in tune. You're picking the right things and handling muting with that. You're using pedals. You're using knee levers. You're using a volume pedal.
Right.
You know, and your ear the whole time. I mean, when I haven't played steel in a while and I sit down to work on it, I feel like I got done riding a bull when I was done because there are a couple things I had to realize when I was trying to play that, and it applies to so many other instruments. Learning to relax while playing, I would notice my shoulder would be tightening up.
Yeah,
I would notice like I'd be clenching my jaw.
Yeah,
doing things like that. So learning little tricks to try to relax, and I started to realize like, let's apply this to some other instruments too.
Yeah,
you know, whenever I'm playing, like I'll do. I have little things that I'll do to try to relax because like tension is absolutely your enemy.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly for singing too. Big time for anything really.
Well, and a little pro tip on that, a thing that I picked up after Eddie Van Halen passed away. I've always been a giant Van Halen fan.
Yeah,
I was watching a bunch of just nostalgic, you know, Van Halen videos from all different eras.
Yeah,
you know, I mean, I love the Roth era and the Hagar era.
Yeah, me too.
I even like Van Halen 3 where they had Gary Sharon singing on this. I mean, I feel like there was cool stuff on that. There's no Van Halen that sucks, in my opinion.
Right.
But anytime you watch Eddie play, he had this just shit-eating grin on his face the entire time. He's always big smile and everything. And number one, it showed how much joy he had playing the instrument. Yeah. But I thought about it. I was like, there's something to that. And I noticed when I smiled, my tension would just leave my body. So I'll notice a lot of times when what I started doing is on purpose, I will smile just to create a looseness.
I've done that too, even with singing.
Yes.
I mean, it's like, it's kind of hard to be smiling and have tension. I know it's possible, but it does, you know, it releases it. But that's one good, difference. You're right about Eddie Van Halen. It's like all the time you see him, he just looks like he's having like he's found something, like he just discovered something new, even though he's been doing this his whole life or whatever.
He also might have just discovered something new.
Well, he probably did.
He was, like I was constantly discovering.
Yeah. Oh, I saw a picture the other day, like this week, I think, of Slash playing a pedal steel.
I saw that too. I saw a short little. I guess so.
Yeah.
I saw the little Instagram video where he was putting it together.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That might be interesting. I don't think I've ever seen him do that live, but so what about the studio stuff? I mean, I know you said that you were hoping to do, obviously that's a little bit easier on the body because most of that happens in town. And so you're balancing that out with the road stuff too.
Yes. And man, I love the creative side of it. You know, the guys who I've just gotten to where I really have looked up to more and more over the years have been studio cats. Because there's something about that ability to go from one genre to the next
Mm-hmm.
and seamlessly try different things and always be challenged to come up with something, even if it's not something complicated. It could be something really simple, but um, to be the one helping craft a song and
Mm-hmm.
take it somewhere, as opposed to playing the same thing night after night, which there's an art to that too. Like to
Yeah.
be able to do that and nail it night after night and to sound great doing it and to put on a compelling performance. That's an art all in its own. But I'm more and more drawn to being able to have a new challenge each day,
Mm-hmm.
if at all possible. Um, and like I said, playing in the studio, it's just a blast. Like I still view the studio as like hallowed ground, because you get
Mm-hmm.
it's pretty amazing. You walk in there with just an idea of a song, that an artist or a producer or a writer or whatever has brought in, and quite often just a guitar vocal. So it's just like an
Mm-hmm.
acoustic guitar or piano and a vocal, and that's it. And then here you are with this team of people, and let's turn this into a full blown record today.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, in the next hour or two.
Yeah.
Like or less. I mean, I've done some like demo derbies where you're playing 14 songs in a day.
Yeah.
Like you basically run it down through. Like you hear half the song,
Right.
producer looks at you and says, "You got it."
Yeah.
You walk in
Yeah.
there with the chart, dial on the sound, and like
Yeah.
we're full steam ahead. It's pretty amazing to see the creative process unfold and the interplay with other musicians doing that. It's
Mhm.
that's my favorite thing,
Yeah.
as a matter of fact.
Yeah. And you said you had co-produced some stuff before. Do you look to do any of that kind of thing? Producing
I am, and
artists or
it's a thing that I'm trying to work my way towards. I like the idea of producing, because whenever I'm involved in production, it's getting pretty freeing to not just have to worry about my instrument.
Mhm.
To be able to help out with different sounds or have different musical references
Mhm.
for the other players. Um, so my background in production is that I have a production team with some guys
Mhm.
at there's a studio we work out on the east side called 12-3 South.
Mhm.
It's owned by Donnie Reese, who he has a duo called War Hippies. Check them out; they're awesome.
War Hippies?
War Hippies.
Okay.
But myself and two other guys. So it's a guy named Mark Caldwell. He plays bass for Tyler Farr as his main gig.
Mhm.
But he's a phenomenal bass player, phenomenal engineer, great producer in his own right. And a drummer named Chris Flick, who is, and just these guys have become some of my really close friends.
Mhm.
And so we now have kind of a production team that we have, that artists will come in, and we have other musicians, obviously, who are involved
Mhm.
in the whole thing, but we're kind of, depending on the song, depending on the artist, depending on the moment, one of us is going to kind of take the reins.
Step in as the producer role.
Yeah, exactly. So like when they're cutting basic tracks, like a lot of times when we're working together, I'm in the acoustic chair. So I'll lay down scratch acoustic with the artist, and then I'm sitting in the control room hanging out while they're laying down drums, bass. We'll have someone else in there playing electric a lot of times,
Mhm.
keys,
Mhm.
whatever else is going on. And I'm the one, since I'm not actually having to play at that very moment, I get to I can see the whole thing going
Mhm.
on. And so it's pretty cool to be able to have guys who I'm close enough with that we value each other's opinions and have enough respect for each other, where you can get on the talk back and say, "Hey man, I'm kind of thinking, like, could you change the how about a hi-hat pattern's a little bit more like this
Right.
or something?" And even though Flick is just an incredible drummer, he comes up with great ideas on his own. He'll still try something, I say. Likewise, if he gets on talkback when I'm recording something, says, "Hey Patty, will you try this?"
Right.
I'm gonna do it, because I have enough respect for him
Right.
and what he's thinking and what he's hearing.
Yeah,
and
he's on the
whole sort of thing.
outside. You're
Yeah.
on the inside. Yeah.
Exactly. So and that's become a more and more interesting thing to me, being on the outside. And I kind of look at producers like a Dan Huff,
Mhm.
someone, for example, like that. Dan's one of the greatest studio guitar players
Yeah.
ever. And then he stepped into a production role. And I've heard him talking with other guitar players, and it's really neat, his perspective on things. Like, I remember he was talking with Tom Bukovac a little while back, who's one of the most recorded guitar players in town.
Yeah.
And he said his whole idea is, yeah, because Tom was saying to him, he's like, man, you could play anything that you want to hear on a record. He says, yeah, but I want your personality on it. He's like, if it's like a rinky dink eighth note part, I can do that. I'll handle all that stuff.
Yeah.
But then I'll call you in because like you're the color guy who I want like to handle these things.
Yeah.
And that's becoming a more fun thing to me. Is like I like the idea of that of being that you can kind of put personnel together, and then on my own, if I'm like as I'm living with a record that I'm working on a little bit more, to be able to add this to it, add that to it, change that if it's something that's from me. So yeah, production's become more and more of an interest of mine over time, but I still also love being the guy who just put me in, coach. Let me play.
Yeah. Well, you're certainly great at it, man. And I
Thank you.
appreciate your time. I appreciate you making the long trip over here to be with us on the podcast. And I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. I'll see you later.
Yes, sir.
Okay, that was Patrick Stevens. I hope you guys enjoyed that. What a great guy, great musician. We're going to put the links to all of his socials and website and everything into the show notes so you can follow him and keep in touch with him and see what he's got going on. Always something really cool. So thanks again for joining us on Broken Rules, and we will see you next time.